Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's broadcast. My name is Alex Patterson. I'm the Executive Director of Canada 2020, and I am broadcasting from Ottawa, which is the traditional and unceded territory of the Algonquin, the Anishinaabe people. I want to thank you very much for taking some time to tune in today. If this is the first event in this series that you have tuned into, there's plenty for you to catch up on. Our Crisis to Resilience series has been stretching on for a few months now. I'll get to that in a second. But before I dive into our conversation today, I want to first and foremost, I want to thank Canada 2020's sustaining partners. These are the companies and organizations who help us do what we do. As a convener, it's been obviously a challenging but also creative year, and these companies and organizations have been really committed to helping us continue to grow and convene important conversations like this one. So I want to thank our sustaining partners. As I mentioned, this event series that we've been doing, Crisis to Resilience, this is actually event 5 in a series that we've been doing. If you can catch up on our YouTube channel, on Facebook Live. If you also like to listen to stuff, I like to listen to stuff, you can tune into our series on the 2020 Podcast Network. Search 2020 Network on your favorite podcast app, and you can listen to some of our past conversations on infrastructure with Minister McKenna and people from the Biden transition team, or on connectivity infrastructure, or in a really important conversation that we held last week around Indigenous economic reconciliation with Minister Miller and Indigenous leaders. So I encourage you to catch up. Today, though, for many of you joining us, this event actually was scheduled to take place earlier on in the year, but I'm actually kind of glad that we have had a little bit more time, because there is some news out of Ottawa today that I think we're going to be able to sort of quick react to. Ottawa's hydrogen strategy has been announced, and I know that Anne and Minister O'Regan are going to dive into that. But in general, our Crisis to Resilience series is focusing on sort of key sectors in the Canadian economy, trying to address the shape and the size of the moment of crisis and how we can build greater resilience moving forward. When it comes to Canada's energy sector and our place in the global energy market, a lot of the challenges and a lot of the headwinds, and indeed a lot of the opportunities, preceded COVID and preceded the pandemic. And so I think our conversations that we're going to have today are going to help us try to get at what about this moment has shaped those pre-existing challenges and opportunities, and what is possible now as we look forward to 2021. To help us do that, as mentioned, we are going to start our conversation with a chat between the Honourable Seamus O'Regan, Canada's Minister of Natural Resources, and the Honourable Anne McLellan, former Deputy Prime Minister, Senior Advisor at Bennett Jones, and a member of the Canada 2020 Advisory Council. They're going to go for about 45 minutes. And then we have an excellent response panel, really a very cool and sort of sectorally diverse response panel. We're delighted to be joined by Theresa Redburn, who's the Senior Vice President of Commercial and Corporate Development at Imperial Oil, Scott Dodd, who's the Director of Business Development at Enbridge Gas Distribution. I suspect he's going to have some things to say about the hydrogen strategy. Kim Rudd, who is a consultant with the Canadian Nuclear Association, but also former Ontario member of Provincial Parliament and former Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Natural Resources. Robert Hornung, who's the President and CEO of the Canadian Renewable Energy Association, and our very deft and skilled moderator of that conversation is Monica Gattinger, who is the Director of the Institute for Science, Society, and Policy at the University of Ottawa. That's what we're going to get to. We're going to wrap this stream around 2:15 today. If you're tuning in, please use the Zoom Q&A function throughout. Or if you're watching on Facebook Live, you can use the Facebook Live chat to submit questions. I'll make sure that they get where they need to go. With that, Anne, I think I'm going to bring you in here. And
Sure.
And we're gonna have just a quick chat, because
Yes.
you were a natural, I think, choice for this conversation, because you've done it before. We had a conversation with Minister O'Regan really early on in the in the pandemic, you had a chance to talk about sort of early pillars of recovery. A lot's happened since then. There's been a lot of learning, a lot more perspective. And so as you prepared for this conversation, sort of talked about where you wanted to take it, what were you thinking about?
Well, I guess a few things, Alex. One of the things, I chatted with Minister O'Regan 6 months ago. And what was our theme? Recovery. We had hoped that by now, December 2020, we would be well into a recovery scenario. Clearly, what we're into is the second wave. And I think it's a more serious second wave, a more severe second wave than any of us would have hoped for. Fortunately, our governments at all levels, I think, have been generally well prepared for dealing with this second wave. We've got a vaccine rolling out, as we all know, and so on. But, you know, I think thinking about, in spite of the second wave, in spite of COVID, the work that is being done, the work that's being done by the private sector, for example, in the energy sector, but the work that's being done in government departments that are not directly related to COVID, like Minister O'Regan's, right? People, I think, might have an impression that somehow the world stopped and everything was about COVID all the time. And one of the things that I want Minister O'Regan to have the opportunity to talk about is the fact that that's not the case, that government does chew gum and walk at the same time, and that so much work has been going on in his department, especially around key transformative elements of the energy space. And that's what I'm going to talk to him about when he joins us. I know he had a big announcement. Oh, he's with us.
He's here. I was about to say, he's here, fresh off a very important announcement. Minister O'Regan, you've got a busy morning, and we really appreciate you joining. So thank you very much for spending some time with us. We've got a thing or two to talk about today.
Sorry to keep everybody waiting, great. Alex, but it was our national hydrogen strategy, and the press conference went a little late. But anyway, if anybody wants to talk hydrogen, I am fresh. So I'll leave that to you, Anne. But anyway, Alex.
Well, Minister, you can tell that Alex and I were filling in time waiting for you to join us.
The story of my life for 10 years, every morning, every technical difficulty or guest that didn't show up on Canada AM.
Yeah.
My heart is with you. I appreciate it, Anne.
We are so happy you showed up.
With that, Anne,
take this.
Yeah, take it from there. The one thing I would just say to our people tuning in, and our room is filling up, which is great. If you just joined and you've got a question, there will be time for questions. Anne and Minister O'Regan are going to chat for a bit, but they will get to some of your questions. Use the Zoom Q&A function or use Facebook Live chat. We will get to it. And we'll try to wrap this portion of this conversation up around 1:15. I think you guys have some hard stops. So Anne, over to you.
Thanks so much, Alex, and good morning, everyone, and welcome, and good morning, Minister. No one's happier to see you than I am. But before we get right into our conversation, let me remind everybody who's just joining that we are hosting an important discussion this morning, morning for me, afternoon for you, Minister, focused on Canada's energy sector, which clearly needs to be resilient both for domestic and global purposes. But Minister, one of the things that we're going to be talking about is, what does resilience mean for the Canadian energy sector? Globally, we know that the energy sector is going through a significant transformation, driven by, among other things, clean technology, climate concerns, and increasingly investor concerns. So what does transformation look like for the Canadian energy sector? And what is the role of government in incenting the transformation, which almost everyone agrees is needed? These are just some of the big, broad themes that the Minister and I will be talking about today. So, Minister, again, welcome. And I know you've just had a major announcement this morning in relation to hydrogen. I think hydrogen is directly related to our climate strategy. And maybe last week, everybody will remember the Prime Minister and your colleague Jonathan Wilkinson made a major announcement around Canada's climate plan. So before I let you go to hydrogen,
Sure.
let me ask you about one element of the climate plan, which of course always attracts the most attention, which is carbon pricing. And of course, quite an aggressive carbon pricing plan out to 2030, announced last week. I'm just interested in what you're hearing, especially from the energy sector in terms of that. My guess is it didn't come as a particular surprise to key players in the energy sector.
Agreed.
Virtually every economist, left, right, conservative, liberal, believes that there has to be a price on carbon to deal with climate change. The devil is probably in the details. Thoughts, things that you have heard over these past few days from some of your key energy sector entities, people.
Some have confidentially told me very, very positive things, and I believe in the market.
Yeah.
And I think if you believe in the market, you know, you gotta embrace those principles. It's one of the reasons why, you know, so many economists did support a price on pollution. So you want to incent, you know, the innovation that this country has shown time and again in the energy sector, and a price on pollution. You know, we have yet to see a more effective and more efficient means in which to do that. You know, it's not often you get, you know, glowing editorials on your environmental policy from the Globe and Mail, but you know, it was pretty good.
Yep.
And I think, frankly, I think it was accurate. You know, there's a lot of things that are already happening out there. Alana Natchews, the mayor of Sturgeon County in Alberta, you know, said, look, you know, we know that we can do hydrogen because we're doing it. We're already doing a lot in this country. At the end of the day, what we want to do and what we need to do is lower emissions. When you put a price on carbon, when you have a clean fuel standard, you're doing a few things. You're saying to, you know, our domestic suppliers and everybody, look, you know, this is the way to go, and you will be rewarded if you take this route. And you know, investors needed to see that as well, as you know, to distinguish who's serious and who's not serious.
Mm-hmm.
And frankly, the other reason is the world's watching. The world is watching, most especially for your province and for our #1 export as a country, Canada. Oil goes to really one customer, and that customer is about to change demonstrably come January 20th to the most ambitious environmentalist administration that the United States has ever seen. They are going to be looking for a jurisdiction to supply them oil that it takes lowering emissions seriously, that has an ambitious, but I believe realistic price on pollution regime in place. I can tell you, because I'm working, the Alberta government and myself, Sonia Savage and James Rashad, your former colleague. So Sonia Savage being the Minister of Energy for Alberta, James Rashad, we were speaking just last night. We need to work together on this. We were talking about how, you know, just learning some things on the ground. We know that the farm lobby and others in the United States are speaking to the incoming administration about a clean fuel standard.
Mm-hmm.
So regardless of where you fall on the political spectrum on this, it does not change the fact that your customer is about to change what it is going to be demanding. And the customer is always right. So we got to change. You know, that's #1.
You've opened a bracket here with the Biden administration, and quite clearly, President-elect Biden has made it plain that there's going to be fundamental change in terms of the U.S. position in relation to climate change, the environment more generally. First thing he's going to do, he says, is rejoin the Paris Accord.
Mm-hmm.
He's going to spend tens of billions of dollars in the clean tech sector. Mm-hmm. Maybe we should be a little worried that there's a bracket Buy American, but that's a topic others can talk about. And I think to your point, we need to be ready to take that on and be, I think, positive, forward-looking partners with the Biden administration around climate change. Obviously, sitting here in Alberta, as I am, the Keystone Pipeline is an issue for the Canadian energy sector, not just Alberta, but more generally, the Canadian energy sector. And I wonder, I mean, Mr. Biden was part of the Obama administration. They were very clear that they did not support Keystone. I know you've referenced your involvement with Alberta's rep in Washington, James Rajat. And I do know that the two of you have been working together. And maybe you'd like to say just a little bit more about that, because certainly it is on some people's minds.
Yeah, you know, I'm broadcasting to you from you know, a rock in the middle of the North Atlantic, and I grew up in a small town in the north in Happy Valley, Goose Bay, Labrador. That causes you to have a very clear-eyed, practical, realistic view of the world. People here really don't have the luxury of ideology. You deal with the world as it comes, as you see it. It's hard enough out there, right? Just as a reminder, you know, Newfoundland and Labrador also is more dependent as a province on its oil royalties than Alberta is. I look out the window here from my office and I see the supply ships heading out to the offshore vessels all the time. I'm constantly reminded of the importance of this industry to our country. Keystone XL was something that, you know, way back before the election, when he was leader of the Liberal Party of Canada, the Prime Minister strongly supported. Right. I can tell you, it didn't get a whole lot of media, but you know, this was something that he brought up with the president-elect in his first conversation with Joe Biden. And you know, this is a priority for this government. Being able to get our product to market as safely and as efficiently as possible is important, and oil will be with us for some time. TC Energy has done, I think, tremendous work. The KXL pipeline of 2015 is not the KXL pipeline of 2020. You know, they are talking about operationally hitting net zero. They are talking about dealing with working with First Nations on our side of the border, but working with tribes south of the border as well. You know, they are lining up all of these things, and most particularly, and I think that, you know, I'm not going to assume what the incoming administration thinks of these things, but I think that, you know, they are very much pro-labor and had been working closely with unions, and TC Energy has been sure to work with unions on the construction of KXL south of the border, and that's thousands of jobs. So, you know, there is room here in this space, and I know that to a lot of people who look at it, who are on either side of the spectrum, they don't get how, you know, we can be talking about aggressively lowering emissions and yet you know, have the KXL pipeline. And I would say, as you know, we are, and we really have to, you know, it's something that I'm reminded of sitting in this seat. And when I got this job, and my predecessors, Jim McCarran and Amarjeet Sohi, said, you know, Seamus, we know that in your previous position, you went to every corner of Canada as Minister of Indigenous Services. And, you know, I grew up in a small place in the north, so I love going to those places. They said, well, now, you know, as Minister of Natural Resources, it's going to be all Abu Dhabi and Vienna and Paris and, you know, these highfalutin meetings with other energy ministers from around the world in the G20. And I have attended all of those meetings, Anne. From right here.
Yes.
From St. John's. Yeah. Probably the first G20 meeting that was held in St. John's, at least partially. And you know, I can tell you that the way that the world sees us is we are the fourth biggest producer of oil and gas in the world. Mm-hmm. And I am proud of that. We are. We became really good at it. What we were able to do, two things I would say regarding oil. We managed to figure out a way to get oil out of sand and drive our way to the fourth biggest producers of oil in the world. Also, I would add, for my neck of the woods, we managed to figure out how to get oil from the offshore. ExxonMobil says it is the harshest environment that they operate in anywhere in the world. Yeah. And yet we do it here. So now we need those same men and women who built this industry to put us in this place as the fourth biggest producers. We need them now to lower our emissions. We need their expertise, we need their talent, we need their ingenuity, we need their determination. We have proven what we can do in the past, and now we need to do it. We need to pivot, and we need to take those industries and we need to lower our emissions. And we have to do that. We have to do that because of the moral imperative. We have to do that because of the existential imperative of combating climate change. And we have to do it for our future prosperity and for the future of our country. This is too important in industry. You know, we're a country, there's no other democracy in the world that's blessed with the natural resources that we have. No other country in the world. And we are well positioned, you know, with the brains that we have to take it and to use it properly, responsibly, and lead the world.
Now, time is moving on, Minister, and we must allow some time for questions.
Yep.
You and I could talk probably all day.
And
but,
have.
obviously, if we're going to get to net zero by 2050, reducing carbon intensity of fuels is going to be key. So here's your opportunity to talk about hydrogen and the announcement you made today. And look, the country has been waiting for this announcement. I know here in my own province, we'll be announcing our hydrogen plan in the coming months.
Yes.
We may be a little behind others in the world. Maybe I put that in with a question mark behind it, but certainly the plan you announced today is the purpose is to position us as a global leader, I presume, both in green and blue hydrogen. So here's your chance, Minister. Tell everybody online what you said this morning.
Well, I would argue, and if I may, that we are not behind. Now, we might have been slightly behind other competitive countries in putting out a plan. But, you know, like I said, like Alana Nanchu said, the mayor of Sturgeon County, we're already doing it. And even more to the point, I think if you look at, you know, if you look at Randy McEwen, who joined me, and president and CEO of Ballard, you know, I am old enough to remember riding in a hydrogen bus at Expo 86 in Vancouver.
Yeah.
And I, you know, also rode around, and there was a fleet of hydrogen buses in Vancouver for the Olympics in 2010. In 2020, hydrogen's time has come. And Ballard is all over the world. It's one of many Canadian companies, but the leading Canadian company in fuel cell batteries. And you know, I was having a conversation with the Danish ambassador to Canada a few months ago, and she just brought up the fact that all over the University of Copenhagen, Danish students are driving around and getting transported around in Canadian technology. Canada's driving them around. We are in many jurisdictions already. You know, Ballard is, I think, got 900 employees. Keep an eye on that, though. That is going to explode. So we're already doing it. What we needed was, you know, basically a plan. So we are working together, you know, recognizing energy, of course, as a provincial jurisdiction, that we are working with Alberta, that we're working with Quebec, which is, I think going to have a tremendous opportunity to not only provide domestic hydrogen supply through hydrogen electricity, but we'll be able, I think, to be an exporter of green hydrogen and export it. Yeah, and I think, frankly, the argument between blue versus green is a false argument. It really depends on the region of the country, because at least right now, what we see is we'll be producing hydrogen close to where it'll be used. You know, we want to produce hydrogen close to heavy industry, like a cement plant or steel operations, you know, these sorts of things. In Sweden, I think they've got a facility that's now up and running that is run by hydrogen in this space. Or, you know, it might be a truck stop, because we're looking at long range transport trucks, you know, in transportation. In places that are harder to electrify, that's where hydrogen fits in. So it depends on where we are in the country. And, you know, it's the government of Canada. So, you know, we have to look at every part of the country and what's available to them. Blue hydrogen, at least in the outset, is more akin, I think, to Alberta. Green to Quebec. I think, you know, here in Newfoundland and Labrador, it would probably be green because of our you know, surplus supply of hydroelectricity. We also have massive natural gas reserves available offshore, but I think green seems to be where things are going. It is important, though, you know, whether we are talking about, you know, everything you said, our climate plan, our hydrogen announcement, the clean fuel standard, the price on pollution, that we allow the market to work. It is the most sustainable way to see this change through, is allowing the market to work. And if anybody makes the argument that the market has been a laggard here, I would say take a look at what's happened since the spring, how quickly the market has moved, not only in terms of investment, well, mainly I would argue in terms of investment, where people are putting the money. This is something that was happening beforehand. I mean, I was out in Calgary meeting with Sonia Savage and some of the brighter minds in the oil patch talking about, the fact that BlackRock, as the largest private investor in the world, was divesting itself of Canadian energy, I should say, oil, particularly Alberta and Saskatchewan. And that's a huge issue. And nobody's going to accuse, Goldman Sachs and JP Morgan and Morgan Chase and, Morgan Stanley, of being necessarily tree huggers per se. They're out to make money. They see what direction things are moving in, and they move quick, blindingly quick for governments. So I keep quoting the great one on this, but you got to skate to where the puck is going, and we have to do that.
You mentioned the export opportunities in Quebec, which are very real, especially in the northeastern US with green hydrogen. I think Alberta sees a strategic opportunity with blue hydrogen, but we're going to need some infrastructure investment into export markets like Japan and South Korea. They're already planning, they're budgeting for importation of hydrogen as part of their climate change initiatives and energy strategies going forward. So I think there are lots of moving pieces with hydrogen, Minister, and it's going to be key for federal, provincial governments and industry to work together to make sure the pieces aren't all just flying off in different directions, but that we have a cohesive, coordinated plan.
Well, just to bring up transport quickly, Saudi Arabia just sent its first shipment of blue hydrogen to Japan. I make the argument that Canada is really at the heart of the G7 between coast and coast and coast, and with obviously our border with the world's largest economy in the United States. But as you point out, we've got the west coast that is so close to Asia, and then here on my side, we're so close to the European Union. And the way that they're ramping up and started ramping up on hydrogen in the spring and early summer positions them not only as a competitor of ours, and I think that that's healthy, but it also, especially for exporting companies like Ballard that already have a foothold in the European market, but they're also going to be a customer. That's the bottom line. I mean, they don't have the natural resource capacity that we have in this country.
Now, Minister, I do have to go to a few questions. Here's the first one from an organization you know well, the Canadian Fuels Association. Their question, we've heard a lot of concern about the impact of carbon pricing on the competitiveness of the Canadian energy sector. But I was wondering if you could speak a bit about where you see Canadian energy having an advantage over our international competition, both now and potentially in the future. Boy, that's a big question, Minister. Take any part of that you want.
Well, what you want to do, what you want to do is incent lower emissions, and you want companies to, be able to have a clear understanding of where that price is going to go, so that they can make the investments that they need to make sure that they make more money, or that they make money anyway. I mean, that's what we want to see happen. I would also make the argument too that, if we don't stay on top of this, particularly now, especially now that we see a change in government in the United States and Joe Biden becoming president, and the agenda on which he ran very clearly.
Yeah, very much so.
Very, very clearly. There was no, the American population, despite all the drama that we've seen over the past number of weeks, they made a clear choice. And so things are going to change with their number one customer and their number one competitor. I don't know whether or not they will be, going ahead with their own price on pollution. They may, and there's a lot of, obviously, how this goes, Ann. I mean, we'll have to see how Georgia goes with its senatorial race, whether or not, how much of a hold, how ambitious Joe Biden and his administration can be. Yeah. We're not quite clear on that yet. We know he can do, quite a bit by executive order, and we know that he's got a way in Congress. We definitely know what direction he's heading in. We've got to head in the same direction. If the price on pollution will incent companies to make the right investments, so that on an international scale, and especially with the United States, we will be strongly competitive.
Here's another question, favorite topic of yours, I think, in relation to the importance of nuclear going forward. If the world is going to deal with climate change, and if we are going to meet our net zero goals of net zero by 2050. I know you have, you're a supporter of the nuclear industry. It's, in the interests of full disclosure, I sit on the board of Cameco. So this is an area where I and the company are particularly interested. But SMRs are perceived as the new, if you like, real potential for development and growth in the nuclear energy space. I wonder, Minister, again, your department and the Government of Canada have been leaders with a number of the provinces, New Brunswick, Ontario, Saskatchewan, for example, in terms of looking at research and development around SMRs and the potential in our own country, in the north, in remote communities, but also obviously marketing that technology around the world.
Exactly.
Where are we at? Where do you think we're at? I mean, obviously anything involving nuclear is a long-term proposition, but where are we at?
Well, I'm not going to scoop myself. I will just say that our SMR strategy is going to come out, I'd almost say momentarily. It will be
okay,
very,
we've got another big announcement coming this week. Is that what you're saying, Minister?
It will be very soon.
Okay.
And I am very excited about it. Look, you know, I didn't know much about SMRs until I took hold of this position as Minister of Natural Resources. Nuclear is zero emissions, zero emissions. You know, we have a responsibility, I think, to look at some incredible innovation that is happening in this small modular reactor space. So, you know, nuclear, you know, it's very capital intensive, certainly the reactors that we've built.
Absolutely.
You know, getting back to, you know, the question I answered earlier, just talking about reputational risk and making sure that, you know, we are not seen as environmental laggards, which we are not, but we don't want to take the chance on reputational risk. We got to make sure that we stay ahead of this, and we are both in fact and are also seen lowering our emissions as the fourth biggest producer of oil in the world. But we also have a tremendous reputation as a tier 1 nuclear energy country.
Yes.
You know, CANDU has stood the test of time, and we continue to improve it. So now that, you know, the same brains that have brought us that are now working on small modular reactors, which are obviously by virtue of their size smaller, and therefore cheaper. But we are looking at models now that would not just minimize nuclear waste, but in some cases recycle it. So, you know, that's a bit of a game changer, because that is one of the biggest concerns for many Canadians, is A, safety, and B, waste. So, you know, the models that we are looking at would, if not minimize, you know, almost close to eliminate that waste, which is extraordinary. And these are also far safer than even what I would argue are still tremendously safe nuclear reactors. We would, I think the way we envision is we would start out in brownfield sites. We would begin, you know, looking at, you know, industrial capacity. But, you know, there is a vision for this. As somebody who grew up in the North and knows how many northern communities, you know, rely on diesel power, we definitely envision renewables as we're working right now to get these communities off of diesel, or at least minimize the use of diesel. But, you know, people require reliable base load, like that you know, they absolutely need that, and that works hand in glove with renewables, right? You know, having said that, though, one of the interesting things that has come out, I think, as of many interesting things that have come out as we've watched COVID, is the reliability of smart grids, which is good for emissions. So, you know, the way these smart grids work is, depending on usage and demand, they automatically go to the cheapest source. Renewables are always the cheapest source, right? Always, whether it's, you know, particularly solar and wind. But, you know, whether or not that switcheroo, particularly we're watching in Europe, whether that works well or not, it does work well. It still requires a base power. But what I'm saying is that's very good news for renewables. It just means that everything has to work together. And I keep making speeches that saying, you know, we can't get to net zero without oil and gas. We can't get to net zero without SMRs, and we can't get to net zero. And I mean all of it. We can't get to net zero without all of them. You know, and particularly at this stage of the game where we're setting our goals, we cannot afford to turn our back on anything, whether it be blue hydrogen, green hydrogen, you know, SMRs, and the one, you know, the ones that everybody loves, obviously, wind, solar.
Okay, I have another great question for you, and time is passing. How will carbon capture, utilization, and storage play a role in Canada's energy future? Does your government have any plans to roll out a national strategy, a CCUS strategy, with concurrent federal investment, similar to the hydrogen strategy announced today? So you and I have talked in the past about carbon capture and storage. Obviously, again, something the world is really starting to pay attention to as we bear down on, as the world bears down on climate. So what do you have for us there, Minister?
It is a big priority for a whole host of reasons. It works hand in glove with our oil and gas industry and capturing carbon. It works hand in glove. Obviously, that's how we get blue hydrogen is, you know, we're using natural gas, but we're sequestering the carbon that's emitted. So it is, carbon capture is essential. We are working particularly with Alberta. Two of the top, I think, 20 carbon capture projects that are currently under development are happening in Alberta. And Alberta will be coming out with its own strategy, and we'll be working hand in glove with them on a carbon capture strategy. You know, it is essential. It is essential, and you know, there are a whole host of technologies that, you know, companies I think will be looking at and investing. We just need to make sure that we incent those properly, so that we see investments from, you know, from the oil patch and across the country. We also have to make sure that the right financial incentives are in place. The Americans are actually very good at this. And, you know, we need to make sure that we incent these companies here in Canada, because we don't want to lose that expertise. We've got tremendous expertise in this area. Point being, it is absolutely essential to the future. And I just remind everybody that when we talk about net zero, you know, it is net, right? It's the key word really there is net.
Yes.
And that's why carbon capture is so important, because you can have some emissions, and obviously we want to lessen them as much as we can, but if you can sequester them, you know, you are in fact reaching net zero. So they're essential.
Maybe not an announcement of a major federal strategy with investment right away. Is that,
I am, as a former reporter, it would hardly be becoming of me to scoop myself, so I'll leave that alone, Anne. But all that to say, it is a big priority. I don't think, you know, there's no getting around it. And I was talking about it with, you know, Minister Savage just yesterday.
Now, you've talked a lot about your relationships with the provinces. And maybe one question, look, the media, and I'm not criticizing my friends in the media, but they like to accentuate conflict and confrontation. In the energy space, we've seen a fair bit of that over the years, even when I was Minister of Natural Resources going back to the mid-90s. But you, I would say, more than any Minister of Natural Resources in recent memory, talk positively about your relationships with your provincial counterparts, working with them, coordinating with them, collaborating with them. I would hope that Canadians would see that as a really positive development in federal-provincial relations. And I just, you know, giving you a shout out, I know you've worked hard at that, but maybe comment on that, because too often we focus on the confrontational headline as opposed to all the work you are doing in particular with your provincial and territorial counterparts.
A quick story. I had just been sworn in as Minister of Natural Resources and was still in Rideau Hall and hadn't even appeared in front of the media yet when we you know, were forming the government back in November, and everybody was getting sworn in. And a mutual friend had given Sonia Savage, the Alberta Minister of Energy, my number. So she texted me and said, "Congratulations, Minister. When are you coming out to Alberta?" And I texted back, "How about tomorrow?" We had a cabinet meeting the next day. I would have gone that night, actually, except we had a cabinet meeting that day. And I knew it was imperative, particularly after that last campaign, that we had to do better. And, you know, not only because national unity in our country demands that of its federal government, but also because this industry is just way too important. It is too big and it is too important. And I just think, my family, my friends, I mean, everybody here in Newfoundland and Labrador, we are deeply affected by the oil industry. As I said, I mean, we're more dependent on it than Alberta, if you can believe it. We are. And not only that, but, I'd say Newfoundland had a fair hand in building Alberta as an oil power. There's certainly enough people flying between St. John's, Toronto, Calgary. We had there for a good while a flight to Fort McMurray from Toronto. We also had a flight from St. John's right to Edmonton.
Yeah.
And you'll see, the plane is filled with workers. I join a long-standing tradition of Newfoundlanders who fly back and forth to Alberta and Saskatchewan, in working in the oil sector. We know what we're doing. This is a deeply important issue for me as a result. I know its importance, and I don't have time for foolishness, as my grandmother would call it. If you are the minister, I don't care what your political persuasion is. If you were the Minister of Energy for Alberta, if you were the Minister of Energy for Saskatchewan, BC, Ontario, I am going to work with you because that's what I got to do. That's the job. That's what Canadians expect. And I think cementing that, to be honest, in this pandemic, I think that expectation has even been more heightened. So no, it doesn't make copy. It doesn't make Twitter. I was really quite taken by the fact that, the Prime Minister made a point of bringing up Keystone XL with President-elect Biden, and it didn't make any noise whatsoever. If he hadn't, it certainly would have, but he did, as he said he would do. And we have, he has asked me to follow up and work with the Alberta government to make sure that we have a Team Canada approach south of the border. Anne, as former Deputy Prime Minister, how our trading partners, most especially the United States, they're very good at what they do at the negotiating table. And one of the first things anybody would do at the negotiating table was try and find light between the people on the other side of the table. I don't want there to be any light as we deal with the United States going through this change. I don't want there to be any light between us if I can help it. So, when last Tuesday, the Canadian Embassy in Washington had a big conference on continental energy security, James Rashad, the Alberta envoy to Washington, and myself appeared together and staked out the Canadian position together.
You know what, Minister? I am getting a high sign from our controller back in Ottawa, Alex. But let me say,
is Ottawa telling you what to do?
People have learned they shouldn't try that. But hey, but you know what? I can't imagine a better note on which to end this conversation. Because we're all looking for light, we're all looking for hopefulness and positivity as we deal with this second wave of COVID. And I think what you've just said about your commitment to working with your provincial and territorial colleagues, and how important that is. If we're all going to get to a better place, energy will fuel our future prosperity.
Absolutely.
And we need to be a domestic leader. We need to be doing the right things at home and the right things around the world. And that means you and your colleagues at other level in the provinces and the territories are going to have to work together. And I just think it's such a great note in this holiday season on which to end. So on behalf of all Canadians, I say thank you. Thank you for your approach to your job and your commitment to making government work. And I think with that, Alex is going to pull the plug on both of us, Minister.
Okay.
Yeah, I was scared to come off mute there and intervene, because the conversation was, I think, and as you said, it ended on a perfect place, and it's a nice segue into our response panel. Minister O'Regan, just while I have you, there are lots of questions that we didn't have time to get to. We'll make sure that we send those to your office, and if you're able to engage, that's great. And always a pleasure. Great job leading the conversation. Minister O'Regan, congratulations on getting that announcement out the door today. We know how much work is involved. And thank you very much for spending some time with us today. We really appreciate it.
Thanks, Alex. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank
So
you.
while Anne and Minister O'Regan exit the stage, I'm going to ask my response panel to join in. So if Theresa and Kim and Monica and Scott and Robert could turn their microphones on and video on. Everyone's looking good. Everyone's with us, which is great. So we've got a lot to obviously unpack there. Monica, I don't envy your job. I know you left some flex and some room at the top to respond, and I think you're going to be making good use of that time. To remind people who have just joined us, we're now going to a response panel. We're sort of across the sector here. We're very fortunate to be joined by Theresa Redburn, who's the Senior Vice President of Commercial and Corporate Development at Imperial Oil, Scott Dodd, who's the Director of Business Development for Enbridge Gas Distribution, Kim Rudd, who's a consultant with the Canadian Nuclear Association, former Ontario MPP and former Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Natural Resources. Kim, you've been on our platform a few times over the past few months. Thank you for doing that. Robert Hornung, who's the President and CEO of the Canadian Renewable Energy Association. Robert, it's good to have you on. And as I mentioned, Dr. Monica Gattinger. She is the Director of the Institute for Science, Society, and Policy at the University of Ottawa. Monica, you are going to take it from here. I will be staying on to stick handle some questions. Many of the ones I think that we didn't get to with Minister O'Regan are applicable to this panel here. So Monica, it's over to you.
Great. Thanks so much, Alex. When you first introduced the session, you said that this was going to be a cool panel. I have a feeling it's going to be a hot panel. This is a dream panel to moderate. Talk about a terrific group of respondents. In terms of our approach for today, we've got a number of topic areas that we want to address, all of which relate to the discussion that we just heard. But maybe we can really start a little bit with some brief reactions from the panel to the session with Minister O'Regan. I think one of the things that McLellan said that really rings so true is that in spite of the second wave, there's been so much going on, and that was made very clear by the discussion that she had with the minister. I was really struck by his customer focus, very globally focused, collaboration focused on energy and climate imperatives, very much an all of the above approach, all hands on deck to achieve energy and environmental objectives, not only across industries, but also across jurisdictions. So, bravo, Alex, to Canada 2020 for putting on this session. It's so important to position Canada and Canadian energy in global context. So maybe just briefly, we'll do kind of a brief roundtable, ask everybody to give a few reactions short to the minister's discussion with McLellan, and then we'll move into the discussion. So I'd like to start. I'll just sort of go around my screen. I'll start with you, Theresa. Any thoughts in response?
Well, thanks, Monica, and certainly a number of the elements that the minister mentioned are so important to Canada. I mean, he's clearly a supporter of energy in Canada in all forms of energy, and I think that's so important. As we look at where the world is heading, energy demands are going to continue to grow, and Canada has a place in that, and that's what's very exciting. Whether it's renewable, whether it's nuclear, whether it's oil and gas, we can play a role, and I think all those sectors are working very hard to have improved tremendously and are working very hard to continue to improve. So, and the key thing that he said was collaboration, and it is all about collaboration. It's not about finger pointing, it's not about name calling, it's about putting great minds together to find what those solutions will be in the future.
No, absolutely. And I think, one of the things I've observed over the last little while is there seems to be a bit more of a focus on collaboration. Perhaps things are getting a little bit less divisive and polarized than we've seen in the past. That's a topic we're going to come to in a minute in our discussion. But let's continue this quick roundtable. What about for you, Robert? Reactions?
I think obviously a very heartening discussion, I guess I would say. I'd echo the themes around collaboration in terms of that being important. Also just the honest admission and recognition of the scale of the challenge that we're doing and the fact that collaboration is going to be required, the all of the above approach in terms of moving forward. And also, I guess, recognizing the important role that the private sector is going to play and the important role that government can send in terms of sending signals out to the private sector to help inform their choices going forward to move us towards the goal, which I think will ultimately be critical to our success.
Yeah, no, there's no question that there was a big market focus in many of his remarks, but also with that policy a strong policy framework behind it, which again, for those in the audience, as you can imagine, we're going to dive down into that in our discussion as well. Kim, what about for you? Reactions?
Well, as you know, I was member of Parliament and former parliamentary secretary to the Minister of Natural Resources, and I managed the nuclear file for a few years. And what really came out of that work is something that Seamus is talking about. You remember Generation Energy, Monica? You were there in Winnipeg, and I'm sure some of the others were as well. And it talked about the all of the above scenario. It talked about the strategy. You know, Minister O'Regan talked about being the 4th largest producer of oil and gas. Mm-hmm. We know we need oil and gas to get to 2050, but we also need to find ways to decarbonize it. So what does that look like? So the all of the above strategy, going to the collaboration piece, it isn't a competition. I'm looking at this screen and I am seeing people from the nuclear sector, the renewable energy sector, the oil and gas sector, all talking about the same thing. Yeah. And that's not always been the case. And certainly from the nuclear perspective, we are talking to our stakeholders and our partners like the renewable sector and others to talk about how we can work together, because this challenge is huge and we can't do it alone. The only way we get there is if we figure out how to get there together and collaboratively and create what we can call this eco-energy or ecosystem of energy in this country. And I think that bodes well both for our economy as well as for our commitment to net zero 2050.
Mm-hmm. No, absolutely. And I think, you know, one of the things that I'm beginning to see as well is that, you know, the more that we're getting into the how of making all of this work, the more that we're beginning to see that collaboration, you know, up and down value chains across subsectors of the industry, across jurisdictions in Canada and internationally is really key. Scott, what about you? Reactions?
Yeah, I think, you know, it's a great start. I think, you know, the all of the above is the right answer. We need to work together. I mean, and we are so integrated. I mean, we stand in sort of the middle where we transport the energy people need across North America and want. And so, you know, we want to provide our customers with solutions that can help them achieve the goals they want to achieve while we meet the government policy objectives. So I think, you know, there's a lot of opportunity here. I'm very positive about the future and how we get there.
Terrific. So now less people in the audience think this is just going to be a bunch of, you know, people holding hands and singing the praises of what they've just heard. Rest assured, we will get into some details and some challenges here. I think that's absolutely essential. So one of the things that we wanted to dive into a little bit more is really looking at, you know, those global energy markets, some of the shifts and transformations that were alluded to in the discussion between the minister and McLellan and Canada's place within them. So, you know, Theresa, what do you see as some of the key shifts in global energy markets, and how do you see Canadian energy industry and its place in the world?
Yeah. Well, certainly, Monica, energy demand is continuing to grow around the world. Population right now, I think, is about 7.5 billion. We go to about 9 billion in the not too distant future. And that involves lifting, you know, the economies grow and we lift people out of poverty, and that's all great stuff. And all of that takes energy. So energy is critical in the world. And, you know, if you look at the IEA, the International Energy Agency, and their forecasts, they show a shift, certainly. So there's a growth, tremendous growth in renewables. There's a growth in biofuels, you know, a bit of a decline in coal, not unexpectedly. And interestingly enough, oil and gas remains at or close to 50% of the energy mix in a variety of different scenarios, including the sustainable development scenario or 2-degree scenario. So lots of demand, and the demand is a good thing because it creates positive outcomes for people around the world. So what's Canada's role? Well, Canada has abundant, as you heard the minister say, we have abundant natural resources, we have abundant technologies, and we can really play a critical role in the future. In fact, You look at Canada today, where about 81% of our electricity is non-GHG emitting. We have carbon policies now across our sectors, which many of the world don't. And in fact, if I look at my sector, when you look at the global producers around the world, Canada is the only one that has a comprehensive countrywide carbon policy. So we're very well poised to compete. And then if you look at the ESG world, environmental social governance, we are in my sector, we're number one on the Yale Environmental Index as a country. We're number one on the Social Imperative Index, and we're number one on the Governance Index when you compare to the top 10 reserve holders around the world. So Canada's a lot to be proud of. We have a lot to be proud of today. And, as we look to the future, we have a lot to be proud of there. So we really can compete if we all pull together and create smart solutions.
Yeah, no, I think those are some really important points, taking into consideration that global context, but then also some of the performance and other gains in Canada, particularly in your sector, Theresa, where sometimes, understandings of the issues, even within Canada, are a good decade or more behind in terms of where things are at on ESG and other metrics. Robert, what about for you? Sort of same question. What are some of the key global transformations that you see in Canadian energy in that context? But as head of the Renewable Energy Association, how does your sector see things?
Well, I think one of the key changes we obviously see in the impact energy markets is the growing incorporation of climate considerations, whether that's in government policy making, whether that's in consumer choice, whether that's in the decisions of energy investors. And I think it's increasingly clear that the signal is being sent that what we're going to need more of in the future is low and no carbon sort of products and services going forward. And so that's going to influence investment throughout the entire sector going forward. And I think, renewables now are particularly well positioned because of the dramatic declines we've seen. This is the other trend I would say, the dramatic declines we've seen in cost in renewables over the last decade. And now that we can look to a world where we can really envision decarbonizing electricity grids in a cost-effective manner because these technologies have come down so significantly in cost, means we can also really consider increasingly using electricity to meet end uses of energy in other sectors, as we see with the movement towards electric vehicles and transportation, or a new aluminum smelter in Quebec in terms of it's running on electricity only. So there are some significant shifts that are happening. The other shift that we're seeing is obviously I would say a blossoming, in a sense, of a tremendous diversity of solutions providers, which go beyond specific technologies, but include smart grid technologies, artificial intelligence. And what we're seeing, I think, is that's going to push us to is really a need to look at how we can use markets to ensure that we're making effective choices against what are an increasingly broad range of potential solutions to go forward, because we'll never be able to make those choices in a sort of planned way. The markets will need to decide, and I think that we're seeing an increasing trend towards that in energy policy as well, in terms of increase consumer choice, let markets allow all options to participate. Well, Monica, if I could just say one more thing, I would just say, in that regard, and I apologize for that, but in that regard, I would also just say that in terms of the Canada portion of it, Canada is incredibly well positioned to be a global leader in this regard. We talked about how clean our electricity already is. We're one of the few countries that can clearly move to 100% non-emitting electricity. And we have the opportunity to be a leader in providing goods and services in that regard globally.
Great, thanks, Robert. I mean, one might even think, there's like an embarrassment of choice. And Kim, this is sort of where I want to come to you on this. So you mentioned a moment ago all of the above. So like, what does that actually look like in practice when all of the above for Canada is actually it's all with all capital letters?
Well, I just came off a panel that involved the UK and the US, and talking about integrated energy systems, that we have to recognize, especially for Canada, we are such a vast geographic footprint. Most of our population is along the south, and there is as the minister mentioned, we have northern rural and remote communities that are burning millions and millions and millions of gallons of diesel. And it's not just about the air quality and the reliability, et cetera. It's about getting more and more difficult because of climate change to get that fuel to them. So what's the answer? Northwest Territories is looking at small modular reactors. They're also looking at renewables. They're looking at a number of things. And I think we're going to see more and more of that. I guess the other thing I would say about the all of the above strategy is a recognition that almost one size doesn't fit all. In certain areas of our country, it may make perfect sense to use a combination of X and Y, but that combination is not relatable to another province, as an example. And there are a number of factors that come into this, including interties that we don't talk nearly enough about, the export of our energy to the US and other countries. We're a huge exporter of energy, whether it's oil and gas or whether it's electricity. So I think we have to recognize that we have an opportunity here as Canada to continue to be a leader in this space, but we also have an opportunity because of a government change in the US. And that there is an opening with President-elect Biden in terms of his commitment to recommit to Paris and move forward on some of the initiatives that are very much in sync with Canada. And I think that's an opportunity for us, again, from a climate change perspective, but also from an economic one.
Oh yeah, no, absolutely agreed. I think there's tremendous opportunity, lots of alignment between the two, the incoming administration and the current government here, particularly at the federal level, and then opportunities to reinvigorate what have a little bit languished over the last few years. I'll say it diplomatically, Canada-U.S. Energy and environmental relations. So lots of opportunities there. So Scott, I'd like to ask you, at the individual company level, then. How is all of this manifesting? Enbridge has recently put in commitments to net zero by 2050. What motivated that decision, those commitments? What are some of the plans to move forward on that?
Yeah, I think, thank you, first of all. I think, our goal was, obviously ESG and delivering the energy that our customers want, and they're expecting us to move in these directions to meet societal changes. So, and I agree, it's really, it's not one size fits all in this pathway. We have RNG in our distribution operations, renewable natural gas. We're looking at hydrogen. We have a small electrolyzer in Markham. We're looking at blending that hydrogen in our natural gas. We're looking at blue hydrogen in Alberta and Saskatchewan and other areas. So it's really about, finding opportunities that meet our customers' needs and delivering them the service that they want, or delivering the energy that they want in the form that they want. So it's an opportunity. I mean, it takes a lot of work, changing energy systems and the whole system is incredibly complex. There's a lot of, you have to have a lot of stakeholdering, a lot of unintended consequences if you do things too quickly. But I think, one of the advantages that we see with hydrogen is that intertie between the electrical system and the natural gas and other systems as a storage medium, and that intertie will allow those two systems to work together even more seamlessly in the future. So I think there's great opportunity in that, and we look forward to working with companies to develop those opportunities.
Yeah, I'd love to hear, and I'm going to come back to that, if we could, Scott, hear a little bit more about, sort of how that would work for folks in the audience who may be a little bit less familiar. So we've got now net zero by 2050 on the table, which brings us to government commitments. It's net zero legislation recently. It's been a very busy fall, as we just heard Kim, another potential, you were probably aware of this, strategy coming out around SMR. So clearly NRCan and environment and climate change have been extremely busy in collaboration with ISED and others. in terms of, net zero legislation, the climate plan announced last week, a hydrogen strategy finally released today. So lots of action. And I guess, one of the things that we've been seeing in our work at the university around energy and climate issues is that many leaders, folks around this table and others have often made the pained observation that Canada needs some sort of a national vision or a national approach or national policy on energy and climate issues. And in the absence of a vision, a common vision, that we're going to be running into lots of challenges within the country on energy and climate decision making. So I guess I'd like to ask you, Theresa, well, what's your sense? Do all of the various decisions that we've heard over the last number of weeks and months from the federal government, does that amount to a national energy vision or a national climate vision and a plan? What's missing? How far have we gone, and how far have we still got to go?
Well, certainly the devil's always in the details, Monica, so we'll look forward to digging into those. Yeah. But, I said earlier, I think the vision for Canada should be that we can be the responsible energy provider to the world in all forms of energy. And we're an export nation. So, the products and services that we develop, if we export and they're responsibly produced, can benefit the world. And certainly we can also export our expertise, in terms of the technologies. So a real growth, and because energy demand is continuing to grow, it's a real growth opportunity for Canada. So, there's a few things that have to happen. I mean, industry has to figure out the smart way to work on these pathways to net zero. There's many pathways, there isn't one. And what it involves is how can we, with technology, reduce our environmental footprint in a cost-effective way, while providing, sustainable development in the communities in which we operate. So that's a kind of a triple win. And I think they all have to come together. It's not a simple checklist. It's smart integration of all these strategies and all these energies. And then, in terms of we also need the business environment to make that happen. So some of that was contained in some of the announcements this week. But if you think about some of the key elements that are very important, it's opening the aperture on technologies. So we heard one size does not fit all. So let's open the market, free market for innovation, and that drives the lowest cost solutions for consumers at the end of the day. And then removing regulatory barriers. If we want to be a leader, we have to not only have the technology, but get them built. So getting them built means, we've got clear regulatory pathways to make that happen, and we've got commercial pathways to make that happen. And then lastly is competitiveness. And, there's been talk about certainly better alignment with the US, and I think that would help. But we need to be careful we don't have carbon leakage, that we don't have money moving to the US or other jurisdictions that might have lower taxes or more favorable regimes. That's already happened a bit in Canada, but you look recently even at California, and there's many tech companies that are moving their head offices from California to other jurisdictions in the US. So we need to make sure that we've got an environment that's competitive to allow the technologies to be applied and to grow and to build this vision.
Yeah, no, and you lay it out like that, Theresa. You say, well, it in theory very easy, right? Let's make sure that we're integrating, the climate and environmental considerations with economic and energy considerations and competitiveness considerations. In practice, in a federation like Canada's with divided jurisdiction, it takes a whole lot of thinking through. Okay, how are we actually going to make this happen? So again, kudos to 2020 for putting a panel, organizing a panel like this to start getting to some of those issues. Robert, you and I have sat on stages before where you've made this exact point around the lack of kind of a national vision or approach on energy and environmental and climate issues. What's your sense? Are we closer? Have we got it? What's still to be done? Same question in essence for you.
I think there's no doubt that we're closer, and I think that's heartening and very, very positive. I'm still not convinced that we're all on the same page with respect to the final objective in terms of net zero and everyone understanding what that truly means in the end and what the implications of that are. So I think that's something that we'll still need to test a little further. But I do think that this plan actually is the clearest vision of a framework I think that we've had, and provides the clearest sense of a path forward that gives us an opportunity towards moving towards our climate goals. I think the emphasis, and it was mentioned earlier, the emphasis on the importance of the market and the priority and the primacy given to carbon pricing in terms of helping to inform investment decisions, I think is absolutely critical. And I think that sends a very strong and important signal. Again, it's broad in scope and covers a lot of different areas and sort of consistent with this all of the above approach. But obviously it's true, it's a framework. More work needs to be done in all of these areas. Theresa talked about the devil in the details, certainly true. And the other thing is that we ultimately need, when we talk about this being a national plan, we need to see active engagement and participation from other levels of government, the provincial government, the municipal governments, and recognize that there's a lot of the work of how the rubber hits the road, how you remove some of the barriers that exist. Even if a price signal is there, if you can't do something because there's a regulation in place, you need to change. We have regulatory systems that actually discourage innovation when innovation is what we desperately need right now. So I think this plan has provided a good framework to build upon going forward, but there's a lot of work that remains to be done.
Mm-hmm. No, for sure. And so let's sort of start drilling down a little bit more into that. One of the things that certainly has come out in the minister's remarks, has come out in this conversation so far, is the really pivotal role of technology and of innovation. And certainly there's a lot of focus on innovation and technology in the number of announcements we've had over the last number of weeks and months. So Scott, I want to come to you on this and maybe hear a little bit more from you on hydrogen. But I'm sure you've got other technologies you want to talk about. What do you see as some of the opportunities, but also challenges when it comes to recent policy announcements at the federal level for the energy sector?
Yeah, thanks. I think, certainly hydrogen is a prime example of something that needs some help in the development of the industry overall. You need to develop demand and supply in sequence so that you're not out of balance and that you can operate in an effective market. We know that hydrogen compared to other sources is expensive, particularly when you get to green hydrogen, but there are opportunities there. So we look to, invest in technologies that can help reduce those costs. And, just as we've done in other areas, we work to find ways, and it's not a moonshot type activity. It's a series of gradual improvements. And just as, wind farms went from, being quite expensive, now they're quite cheap in terms of their technology and cost to achieve. So it's a gradual, constant, the one thing about, being the market is it rewards that innovation and sequential innovation so that you can move things forward. The challenge we have is that our infrastructure systems are, require, large investments, and they have long lives. So we want to make sure that we're optimizing them and reuse, reduce, and recycle wherever possible. So if you've got something that's already built that you can repurpose, let's find ways to do it. Certainly that's what we looked at when we looked at blending hydrogen into our natural gas system. It's a way to decarbonize that in another way. So I think, but it's a evolutionary process, I guess, would be my view. And as we go forward, we constantly have to make these improvements and move things forward in order to get to the end state.
And just a quick follow-up, if I could, on that, Scott. So, Robert mentioned a minute ago about this isn't just about what the federal government does, it's also about what provincial governments do. And as we know on hydrogen, the federal government is not the only jurisdiction with a strategy. BC's got one, Alberta's got one, Quebec, others. For a company like yours that works across the country, how do you navigate all of that?
Yeah, I mean, you know, the great thing about Canada is we're a diverse group of people across a vast land. So there are opportunities, and there, you know, you look for general sort of ways to work together and across those things. Each individual area has its own differences. You know, certainly I think it's been brought up that blue hydrogen makes a lot of sense in Alberta. You know, green hydrogen makes sense in Quebec. So you find ways to integrate those into your systems. You know, ultimately you want to serve a market, and they have a ready supply in these cases of product that you can hopefully use and satisfy a market need. So I think that's the opportunity. I think, you know, and, you know, at the end of the day, I think, you know, Canada is an export nation, and people recognize that, and we got to find ways to export, because our standard of living ultimately depends on us being successful business traders. And that's been so successful for us in the past, and it can continue in the future.
Great, thanks. Well, one of the other technologies that in addition to hydrogen, that got quite a bit of discussion in the session with the minister was nuclear. So Kim, love to hear you on this topic. Where does nuclear fit in the Canadian context?
Well, I certainly think we're going to hear a little bit more about that, maybe a lot more about that very shortly. It's a pretty exciting time. When I was the Parliamentary Secretary, we developed the SMR roadmap, which was the precursor to this. And it was developed with industry and government, and it really laid out that pathway we're talking about here to development. And the action plan, of course, is the next step of that. You know, I want to just go back to the jurisdictional question and sort of how nuclear plays a role. So you may know, I think it was back in June, if I remember correctly, 4 provinces, utilities and provinces, signed on to a memorandum of understanding, which instructed, is a good word, the federal government to encourage and find ways to support the development of advanced nuclear and SMRs. And it was because things are already being discussed and worked on across the country. You know, Saskatchewan's commitment to off coal by 2030, what does that look like for them? Well, they're going to need one and more than one, rather, suite of those energy systems to be able to replace that coal. What does that look like? They're looking at that right now. I mean, I personally had conversations with CAP and COSIA, and what are they looking at in terms of decarbonization of the oil sands? What does that look like? And nobody has all the answers yet, but what we do know is the data is showing that we can't get to net zero 2050 without nuclear. There is just not enough heft in the system. And as someone earlier mentioned electrification, well, we're pushing more and more towards electrification, whether that's in transportation, whether it's in homes, whether it's in industry. And so in order to meet that demand, we have to have that heft of generation. Mm-hmm. And the SMRs also produce thermal and hydrogen, as we talked about a fair bit today and the minister talked about, as well as electricity. So it is really a complement. You know, the evidence is there that the more installation of SMR, the more opportunity for wind and solar and biomass. So we have a long way to go to get this all sorted out, there's no question. But I think governments around the world are looking at the imperative of climate change, our commitments to Paris, our commitments to net zero 2050, and saying, what are those technologies that may not be here right now, but are in development that will be in the near to medium term? And I'm just going to give you a quick example. A few weeks ago, Ontario Power Generation announced their collaboration with a couple of vendors on a large-scale, grid-size small modular reactor that they anticipate will be ready in 2028. Canadian Nuclear Labs is partnering with another vendor, and they're doing what we call VSMRs, or very small modular reactors that might be used for transportation or small communities or mining, as an example. I've been engaged on multiple fronts with the mining sector around what this might look like for them. And then I would say the other indication from the federal government is the commitment of ISED to provide $20 million for terrestrial energy to accelerate the development of the molten salt reactor. So there's a recognition and acknowledgement that we need us all rowing in the same direction. We need to accelerate all of these technologies and all of this innovation that Canada is frankly very, very good at, and roll them out and deploy them where they make sense, either individually or in collaboration with others. So I'm pretty excited about this announcement coming up, and we'll see what happens.
Great, great. So for those in the audience, we are going to be moving into questions in about 7 to 10 minutes or so. So please start firing them away, and I will be receiving them and posing them to our panelists. Before doing that, though, there's a topic I absolutely want us to get to, which is Canada's energy and climate debate. Are we more polarized? Are we less polarized? Is the polarization, is it partisan? Like, where are we at? And Kim, I actually want to go to you on this one. You mentioned Generation Energy, and both of us being at Generation Energy, I've got some very fond memories from that symposium. You know, and since that time, we've seen a number of different sort of milestones, as it were, in terms of you know, divisiveness over energy issues, whether in terms of you know, particular projects or in terms of carbon taxes. You know, we could all, I'm sure, come up with our list. What's your sense of where things are at now and kind of what trajectory we might be on?
Well, I don't believe climate change is not a partisan issue. Climate change is real, it's here, and while I can't say 100% of Canadians agree with it, I'm going to say the vast, vast majority do. And it's government's responsibility at all levels to figure out how we address that. And the collaboration, as someone mentioned earlier, will be key between all levels of government to make sure that happens. Are there elements in climate plans and energy plans that don't sit well with some folks? Sure there are. But there's a rationale for each element. And it's incumbent, again, for all levels of government to work on finding that work that can be done to find a way to move forward. You know, the carbon, I don't call it the carbon tax, I call it the price on pollution. And it's ingrained in me. And you know, one of the things that when that first came in and our government said there's going to be a price on carbon and it was going to, the proceeds of which were going to be returned to Canadians, it kind of got lost a bit, I think. And it allowed for a conversation that was not necessarily as factual as it should have been. And I think that is part of the challenge with this whole energy transition now. There are people that don't understand nuclear because they're using old information or they're not interested in the information. There are people who are very much anti-oil and gas. They don't understand the work that's been done in that sector in reclamation and reducing GHGs, et cetera, et cetera. There are people who are against my community. I remember the anti-wind folks, and you know, not in my backyard. Those are all real elements we all have to deal with. They're not going away. But I think we can reduce them. In fact, I think we are reducing them. And I think that's where the all of the above approach comes. Kirsty Gagnon from the UK was saying there was a study out, and they said, when you live in a nuclear community like mine, the acceptance of nuclear is very high. But when you live in a community that doesn't have it, they don't understand it, don't know it, not so much. But she said they've done a recent study that showed when you coupled nuclear with renewables, with other forms of energy as a solution, it went from something like 40%, 45%, this is in the UK, 45% with only nuclear and up into 85 and 90% if you combined it. So I think those are the processes we have to work through to get where we need to be. It's not going to be easy, but we all have to be, as they say, singing from the same songbook. It's about climate change.
Thanks, Kim. Theresa, I'd be really interested in your perspective on the same question. You know, coming from industry, as you do, are things more or less divided and polarized? What kind of a trajectory do you see the country being on?
Well, certainly we were somewhat vilified as an industry in some aspects in terms of oil sands, and oil sands are bad and Canada's dirtiest oil, which in fact isn't factually correct. We're producing oil sands, crude oil that's below the national, the global average for greenhouse gas intensity. So, you know, it's what often happens is the hyperbole gets a little blown out of proportion, and it's often by people who just are not informed. They're just not, they don't have all the facts. And, you know, I have great faith in humanity, and over time, the pendulum swings to rational thought. And we are seeing some of that now. I mean, certainly the conversation today has been full of that. So I think you will see over time that the fringe, the people who have the most divisive opinions are actually on the fringe. And the majority of Canadians and the majority of the people on this call today are here in the middle and want to work together to find solutions. And that's how we succeed as a country. And there's a lot of battles to be had. We don't need to battle each other. I think we need to come together and put our smart minds together to solve these challenging problems, and create that vision that I talked about earlier. You know, just about every significant advance in the history of humanity has been driven by new, better, and cheaper technology. But it has to be applied. It has to be applied competitively. So that coming together, I think more and more people are seeing that coming together as being so important. And our industry has made great strides. We've reduced greenhouse gas intensity by over 20% in recent years. We've got technologies that will, you know, we've got technology today that will reduce greenhouse gas intensity by up to 90%. So the opportunities are fantastic. And again, most of the people that are making those comments are a little bit out on the fringe, or don't have the most recent information.
Thanks, Theresa. Robert, I want to come to you on this topic. You know, you had mentioned a moment ago around national vision that maybe they're, you know, at a grand level there's agreement, but maybe when it comes down to a bit more of the details, we might find some differences. If there are some tough conversations that the country needs to have, because I think we're all saying this is likely to be challenging and is going to be challenging, where would you see the key issues being?
Well, I think this whole discussion around collaboration is incredibly important. And I think we see a lot of growing examples of collaboration. I'm running a new association that brought together wind and solar, for example. We're working with energy storage. And why are we doing that? Because we think that together we can provide a more comprehensive solution to offer to customers. You have growing collaboration within the electricity sector because we all see a common interest in electrification. We see growing interest between the natural gas industry and the electricity sector in discussions around hydrogen. So I think all of us believe that there is an opportunity for all of us, and all of us, I think, really just want the opportunity to be able to compete for that opportunity. And that really, again, comes back to letting the market work and ensuring that we have an opportunity to move forward. And I would draw the example of the electricity sector right now. I would argue that to achieve a lot of the goals we hope to achieve in the electricity sector, frankly, it's not a technology question anymore. We've got pretty much most of the technologies in place. What we need is market rules, we need regulatory frameworks to catch up to technology, to enable all of the technology options that are now available to participate, to compete, and to sort of work together to try and find the path forward that's going to be working. And I think the biggest challenge, though, in terms of collaboration, I would argue, is going to be at the provincial level. And at the end of the day, our federated structure is a strength in so many ways. Gives us an opportunity to be innovative, apply different solutions in different areas, but it does sometimes work against collaboration. And if we don't collaborate, there's no hope at all of kind of achieving this goal. And fundamentally, I would come back to what I said earlier. I think the key to collaboration is having a common agreement as to what you're working to achieve. If we all agree on the end result we're trying to achieve, we've got lots of smart people across the country in all these different sectors who can chart the way there. But if we don't have common agreement on that, we just end up talking past each other, which I think has been a problem historically, hopefully not in the future.
Great, thanks, Robert. So the questions are just rolling in. We'll have time for a few before we have to close off here. I'm sure we'll get the hook from Alex at about 2:15 or maybe even shortly before that. So, so here's a question for the group. How should we be financing the energy transformation and mobilizing private capital to help with needed investment? Happy to have anybody jump in on that.
I'm happy to start. There's a role for government and there is a role for private investment. And private investment needs signals from governments, all levels of government, in order to be able to be part of that that project or that system or whatever is being created. Governments can't do it all, but we can't expect industry to go it alone on some of these new innovations and technologies that do take major capital and some time to realize. So I think that's a signal we're getting from the government with the hydrogen piece announcement today as an example. There's work to do. The government has a role, and once those signals come from government around policy, et cetera, then the investment follows. And we know more and more investment is coming, and when they do come, they want to ensure that there is a recognition of climate change within that, within the government's policy and within the company's policy. That's how we'll attract investment.
Other comments on this? Theresa, I think I saw you wanting to jump in.
Sure, yeah, I might just build on Kim's comments that were very good. You know, the regulatory framework and certainty and clarity is very important. I think too, when we're talking about attracting investment, it has to be a competitive jurisdiction. So what do we mean when we say competitive? And I mentioned that earlier. The tax regime needs to be competitive. You know, certainly in parts of the large parts of the US and even in Norway and other places, they have capital cost allowance that recognizes these investments and provides very accelerated attractive structures to invest. They've got a timeline that allows them to build. So, regulatory timeline that it doesn't go on and on forever, but has some sort of boundaries to give them a sense that we're not investing with the hope of being able to build, but actually seeing a pathway to doing that build. So those are just some of the important competitiveness elements that attract capital. And if those don't exist, it's very easy to move money, and money goes elsewhere.
What about, in the Canadian context, we haven't talked about UNDRIP and the tabling of UNDRIP legislation, and of course its existence in British Columbia. Where does reconciliation with Indigenous communities and fit in? I don't know, Scott, is that something that you could speak to?
I think I think the energy transformation is an opportunity to engage those stakeholders. I think that obviously reconciliation can help with energy by providing them the energy they need and they want, and they can develop their own economies as they grow forward. So I think as Theresa mentioned, in order to grow the world's economy, energy is sort of a vital component to that, and it brings people up into the middle class and gives nations wealth. So I think anything that we can do, whether it be a small modular nuclear reactor that we can get into a remote community to help, whether we can find a way to leverage a renewable asset in those communities, or transporting hydrogen in some way. I think those are opportunities for involvement, dialogue, and reconciliation and economic development, if that's what they choose. So I think it's an opportunity. It takes people, as I think Robert said, we need to talk and not talk past each other. And we need to find ways to work together and collaborate.
We've got another question here that I think could enable each of you to weigh in, but from a different perspective, and might actually help us to see in action what an all of the above collaborative approach looks like. So the question reads: the demand for electricity will grow rapidly. Electricity must be dispatched and large quantities cannot be stored. what work must be done to provide Canada with a spectrum of energy transportation and large-scale storage systems for supplying domestic and export markets. Maybe I'll start with you on that one, Robert, if that's all right.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think that I think this is an example of where you have a tremendous wealth of options actually to look at. So when we look at the question of energy storage, which comes forward because of the variable nature of generation like wind and solar and how we're going to manage that going forward, Canada starts off blessed with tremendous amount of reservoir hydro, which can provide a tremendous amount of energy storage services. We look at energy storage technologies, and there's a whole range of them. We hear about batteries the most, but there are other ones that are also moving forward, long duration, short duration, that all have a role. Hydrogen has a potential role in energy storage. Demand side management has a potential role in managing the variability of renewable generation. There are a suite of options, and again, the challenge is, can we set up frameworks that allow all of them to compete? Because at the end of the day, I think it will be a variety of solutions come forward that will be appropriate to different areas, but in all areas, we want those solutions to be the most cost competitive ones. We're going to see a significant expansion of electricity production. We want it to be as affordable as possible, and enabling the market to make those choices would be tremendously helpful.
I saw a lot of nodding heads from the other panelists during that. Thoughts from others?
Yeah, sure, I can go. I mean, look, I think our Markham facility actually has a contract with the IESO in Ontario to provide grid stability support services, and a byproduct of that is hydrogen. So it's an opportunity to store hydrogen, which then can be run through a fuel cell if required and back into the grid. But it's using something that's required in order for the electricity system to work properly, and it's got a byproduct of hydrogen. So it's a great opportunity of the linking of those two systems. And then you could use that hydrogen obviously to decarbonize other natural gas or other energy sources as required. So I think there's lots of thinking out there. There's lots of opportunities, and it's just a matter of finding them and matching the buyer and the seller, so to speak.
Great. Kim or Theresa, thoughts on that one?
I'll just, in terms of the storage piece, we need storage to bring on more and more renewables. We need baseload. We need a number of things. And again, going back to my comment about there'll be different requirements in different places. Just not too far from me, we have a fairly large pump storage facility in an old mine. There are things going on that the average person doesn't know about, and not just the average person, but lots of folks in the field don't know about as well. And that's where those conversations have to come. I'll just go back to CCUS, was mentioned earlier. CCUS a few years ago, with the Boundary Dam in Saskatchewan, there was a thinking around it's too expensive, it can't happen, et cetera, et cetera. Fast forward to 3 years later, the US has really taken this on. Canada has as well. And we're finding that the costs are coming down, just like wind and solar. Think of wind and solar 20 years ago and the costs that were attached to that and where it is now. It's going to be like that with any new technology. And we have to recognize that there is efficiency in collaboration, and there's an efficiency in making sure that we are, the question about reconciliation. You're right, Theresa, it's not efficient if you don't have the regulatory system, if you don't have the certainty to be able to things hang on and hang on. I'm very well aware of that. Jim Carr used to say, you can't build anything until you build a relationship. And I think that's what the sectors have been doing. They have been building a relationship with Indigenous peoples across the country and finding a way to work together to make sure that everyone is on the same page and that everyone has the opportunity to benefit, and not just from benefit agreements that involve money, but also from their own economic development perspective and what their needs are. So I think we're sort of on the cusp, I think, of a lot of things, and I'm pretty impressed with the work that's been done over the past few years by industry, particularly about moving us forward.
Great. So we have time for one more quick question. This one actually deals with geopolitics. I've sort of been thinking about it as I've been listening to your responses to the last one. So the question reads, what will be the geopolitical implications for Canada of clean energy transition over the next 10 years?
Wow, that's
maybe I could offer, and I've already said it, but I could offer again. You know, Canada's got a strong place in the world today, and can be even stronger tomorrow if we do all the things we talked about. So, from a geopolitical standpoint, I think Canada can play a huge role in the energy space, from you know, replacing some forms of energy that don't have the strong ESG characteristics that Canadian energy does. So we can replace Saudi Arabia crude oil. We can replace Russia crude oil. We can replace some of the other, you know, products on the market today. So we've got a role to play, and in a way, it's incumbent upon us, because when we do that, and we do that with lower greenhouse gas intensity, when we do that with better human rights relations with our communities, then we're lifting the world up. We're bringing the world to a better place. And how exciting could that be?
Well, what a great place to end on. I see Alex is giving us the virtual hook. So allow me to close off this session to thank all of our panelists. What a terrific discussion. Thank you so much for sharing your perspectives. Alex, over to you.
Thank you very much, Monica. Yeah, Monica, I was just about to say thank you very much. You made my job and our job here very easy, dealing with I think a really fascinating and timely and diverse set of panelists and issues. So really appreciate the time. Robert, Kim, Theresa, Scott, thank you very much for your time. We really appreciate you know, having such a great panel. Quickly following on a conversation with the minister that literally was breaking news, which is great. Lots more for us to do. I mean, if you take one look at the Q&A function here, this is probably the most active Q&A that we have had in many of the sessions that we've done here. Theresa, there's some specific questions for you that I'm going to send you by email, and maybe we can do another event on it. Same for you, Scott. Same for you, Robert. Same for you, Kim. So thank you to everyone who's tuned in. Monica, thank you very much for your time. If you want to listen to this again, which I certainly do, you can do that on the 2020 Network on your favorite podcast app. This may be it for us for 2020 from an event perspective. We may do something else between now and the end of the year, but I'm not going to promise anything. But if you have been with us throughout this series, I want to really thank you for taking the time to engage. Our audience has actually grown over the course of these past few months, and I think it just shows that the market for ideas is open, and we really appreciate everyone on this panel helping to contribute to that. So thank you very much. Appreciate your time, and hope you have a safe and happy holiday season.
Thank you.
Thank you, Alex. Bye, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.